G'day Nina, how are you?
Good, thanks, Andrew. How are you?
Back from the honeymoon?
I know, it feels so weird to be back. Like, I feel like I haven't done this in years.
We are feeling very anxious. I just want you to know.
I am very nervous.
Well, look, can I just say, we probably, later on, we're going to do, I think, probably the most important case of the last 12 months, Elisha in Vision Australia. And we've separately done a detailed bulletin that actually drills down it with Tom and I. So we'll touch on it.
Starring Tom.
Starring
Tom,
for that
one.
Get to Tom. But look, I'll tell you what, one of the things that really struck me is this New South Wales case for a lawyer using artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. So basically what happened was a lawyer who apparently was very stressed, short on time, used ChatGPT to write his amended pleadings and his the application for the Federal Circuit Court. And all of the references were wrong, so they spent heaps of time trying to find these cases that they just couldn't find. And he's now being referred to the New South Wales Legal Services Commissioner.
Yeah.
And I think it was really important. I think this was my case. The only one that was my case that I wanted to put in is because I think definitely in my life I'm seeing everyone turn to AI more and more because it is so convenient.
Oh, no, I've seen letters of demand come out which are AI letters. I've seen disciplinary letters used, which are deeply flawed and have American jurisprudence in it, not Australian jurisprudence. It's an incredibly useful tool.
Yeah, we definitely use it in our work to find cases and stuff, but you got to be careful how you use it.
Yeah.
I think if you become complacent, you're really going to expose yourself to risk. And I mean, lawyers are getting it wrong.
Yeah,
that's
and
an example.
We're spending a lot of time and a lot of money over the next year focusing on AI to improve the cost of service, the speed of service. We're there, we're embracing it, but I just want you to warn there, don't press the button and think you've got it right. You've got to start. That's all you've got. Okay?
Yeah, I think if you use it that way, then that's great. But don't put all your eggs in that AI basket.
Melbourne University in underpayment, 25,000 people underpaid.
Total
of 72 million underpaid.
Huge.
And the Fair Work Ombudsman got them into an enforceable undertaking with a 600,000 contrition payment. Thanks for that. $250 million of underpayment across the university sector. This is an educated sector that doesn't get stuff wrong normally.
I don't know. I feel like the last couple of years there have been quite a few underpayment cases.
No, but I guess what I'm saying
unis.
is this is a tertiary institution with specialised people doing payroll, not mum and dad.
Yes, that's true. Dedicated teams, actually.
And yet here we're seeing casual loadings, we're seeing rostering problems, we're seeing all issues you and I see every week with underpayments in an organisation that got it wrong repeatedly over 25,000 employees over a substantial period of time. So, what was it end up being in the enforceable undertaking and why did it happen?
Well, I think the main reason was instead of paying people, the casual academics, by hours, they had these weird metrics like how much time with students, how many words per hour you were marking, things like that. And so obviously it led to massive discrepancies. But I think the more alarming thing is the NTEU, in true fashion, are now pushing for the enforceable undertaking, which was a lot of work and a lot of effort. I think they've got to do things like set up specific people to look at these things. They have to be channels for people to raise wage complaints, whole heap of different things. They want it to become nationalised for all unis. And I think starts the NTEU, you're going to have all the other unions pushing for this for all the other businesses too.
It's interesting, you and I talk about annualised wage and what an incredible cost to bookkeeping and actually managing matters it is. We need to be careful about what we're doing. We need to be careful that as we try and do things to correct things, we don't create this bureaucracy and red tape behind running a business because, your mum and dad run a business, I run a business, I run several businesses, and I'm constantly juggling what our obligations are. And yet I have very skilled people who do that, as does your parents. And I'm sure your dad, like me, sits there and goes, God, I hope we're getting this right, because there's so much to do.
Yeah, but also with too much bureaucracy, it's easier to get it wrong.
It is.
It's easier to lock yourself in a problem where you've committed to doing something more than what you legally have to do. and you're setting yourself up, because when you're not doing it, then the Fair Work Ombudsman can turn around and say, no, you committed to doing this and you're not doing this.
Totally, no.
Now with criminalised wage theft,
and we've
it's
got
a
an
problem.
award system which is impenetrable.
Yeah.
It's written by people who are non-lawyers, and so it's inconsistent gobbledygook half the time. And you and I spend our life swimming in this rubbish, trying to find out what the right law is. And our poor clients are there, pulling their hair out like me and going, I just can't work out what this means. And the truth is, we're doing a thing at the moment where we're going back years and years and years and years to find submissions and judgments on the meaning and award in a clause which is a nonsense.
Yeah.
We've got to find a simplification process. I know that's not what we're going to say, but
but it's true.
We don't get simplification. This is just it's chaotic at the moment.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think that's a good segue into the next thing.
Because it's just happening again, isn't it? So
no, because it is kind of trying to do that. So the next one is about the new code for small businesses.
So the voluntary code's coming out. If you comply with the code, and the code is more of a best practice, if you do these things, if you rely on good resources to get support, if you look at the award and try and meet it, you do all those things.
Yeah, you have done your best to ascertain correct information. Notably, they said you don't have to comply with every single factor. It's going to be like a holistic whole picture thing. The Fair Work Ombudsman's going to look at.
Do you know my difficulty with this? So this is this compliance code. What it means is if you comply, if you're able to demonstrate you've almost acted in good faith towards doing the right things, they will deem it is unintentional. And
you're not going to be prosecuted by the Fair Work Ombudsman.
Yeah,
could still have civil claims, but they will not go after you.
Look, nice to see for small business, but the reality is small business don't have the resources, don't know where the resources are. They rely on their accountant, people they went to school with. It is very unlikely that any small business will actually comply with this code, nor even know of its bloody existence, to be perfectly honest.
I think the latter is definitely true. But I think if they're relying on accountants and stuff, that is a pretty strong factor in terms of we thought we were doing the right thing. So long as they gave them accurate information.
And I've paid a lot of tax I didn't mean to pay.
You're not a small business.
I wouldn't think relying on an accountant was a reliable thing to do. Anyway.
Oh gosh, what's with all this defamation at the start of the year?
I thought we'd start early. Remember we said when we were talking about you want to do more defamation work? I'm just getting it out there in front of us. Fascinating case, Hawken and Patrick Stevedores. And I reckon this is a topic you and I have talked about many times.
Yeah.
Which is
drug and alcohol.
Yeah. I've got a set of policies. They're good, lawful policies. And I've got safety law. Does safety law say that the policies are everything that is reasonably practical? Do they marry? Does one equal the other? And the answer is safety always wins. So he was a person who repeatedly failed drug tests 3 in a row.
Yeah, over more than, but it was kind of more, there's time between them. That was the issue, yeah. There was like a year and 11 months between the last 2 offences.
It was. Yes, actually, that's right. But the thing that struck me about this is there was a failure of compliance with the
policy.
With the policy. So employers failed the policy, and therefore the issue was, valid reason, yes, no problems with that, failure to comply with the drug and alcohol policy, allowed termination. Safety said the person should be terminated. They repeatedly do it. But the argument was around fairness and, if the company doesn't do the right thing, why should I be terminated?
Yeah, but to be clear, it wasn't a failing. I think we've got to explain what the failing was, because it goes to the heart, because it was an appeal case. And essentially, he'd gotten the first warning, then gotten a final warning, and they did a show cause and terminated with the third one. So they kind of followed due process. But the policy said you could not be terminated unless the incidents it was more than 3 incidents within a 12-month period.
Yes.
And because of that slight difference, he brought an appeal and said, you cannot terminate me. Which is just crazy if you think about it, like the gall of this guy to say, no, I was testing positive for drugs and I'm doing high-risk work, but because it wasn't that period, you can't terminate me.
Isn't it interesting when we talked about, and we'll talk about Elisha again, see how careful employers have to be by tying their hands together about creating obligations around what employers' rights of termination.
Yeah.
Because this is a stupid thing.
It was a very prescriptive policy, which is not very good.
Fortunately, the appeal court just said, look, this guy is doing high-risk work. He's been given warnings. He knows the risk.
Yeah.
And he does that again. Don't worry about the process. He's gone.
Yeah, the valid reason more than overrode any,
Yeah.
lack of procedural fairness.
All right. Well, why don't we move on to the next case? WorkSafe WA and Mondelphus. Okay.
Yeah.
Exclusion zone. Unfortunately for us, we've most recently dealt with a case which is very similar to this, where a fatality occurred, where the person who's meant to be underneath.
Well, are you talking about this case?
Yeah, this case.
Yeah, so this case was, there was a spotter and someone operating a telehandler, but when the telehandler was lifting this metal frame, it was very unstable. It wasn't, there were no lifting points and it wasn't actually attached.
It's nearly 700 kilograms.
Yeah.
And the spotter walked within its
Yeah, went underneath it
Yeah.
and it fell off.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
from a person who used to do construction work a long time ago, before safety was alive, I was a 17 or 18-year-old boy in some ways. But I've watched now all my life lifting and spotters. So as I drove home the other day, they were lifting, a crane was lifting this massive load of piping, okay? And the spotter was standing next to the truck as the crane lifted it, and there was a relatively strong wind at about 2 floors up. So on a regular basis, this was rolling out above the spotter.
Wow.
And I wanted to get out of the car and run, to be honest, because I was the first car. I was only about 10 metres away from the fall zone. But it just shows you this is a constant issue. And human nature is such that when you're not, when a bit of glass is not sticking in your arm, you feel safe.
Yeah, that perception of risk, which we
and
always
this is
talk
a
about.
perception of risk code. They end up with a $685,000 fine for this. So it is
It's the second highest fine in WA history.
Yeah. And look, WA has a very poorly resourced safety regulator. In Victoria, I doubt if this would be a primary duty breach. I'd be inclined to say...
Oh, yeah, reckless endangerment.
This is a reckless endangerment, particularly since the Canberra hospital incidents and stuff around cranes. Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia. This would be reckless endangerment.
Yeah, because the breach was the fact that they hadn't even given them site-specific induction. Like, it was a blanket solution kind of thing. And, yeah, it definitely would not fly in Victoria.
Yeah. So, look, remember, jurisdiction by jurisdiction is a little bit different. There are some jurisdictions which, so, if you look at Northern Territory, quite unpredictable what's going to happen in the courts up there. Small population, huge risks in territory, but the judgments are difficult to follow from time to time. Victoria, very clear, and the tariffs jumped by 20% in the last 3 or 4 years. New South Wales tariffs dropped about 20% when WHS came in from where it used to be and is now climbing up to where Victoria is. Queensland and South Australia are remarkably high, and not before WHS came in, they were both very low, and they've jumped. So we're getting this change in Australia culture where tariffs are going up. But can I just say, crane work, motorised plant in any form is incredibly high risk, and there's no such thing as small fines these days when it comes to it. And in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia, the use of cranes with spotters underneath them is reckless endangerment, full stop.
Yep.
All right. I thought I might talk briefly, new matter, building code and safety. Again, this is a very sad case. This is Glenorchy High School. A young girl called Fiona had spina bifida in a motorised wheelchair. It went up a ramp and was marked with green on the side.
And no railing.
No railings, and there was next to it grass. So you actually, for a person who didn't give immediate attention, it would be hard to differentiate the signs. And she fell about a metre and ended up with traumatic head injury and died. But the school undoubtedly complied with building code.
Yeah, it had been constructed in accordance with the National Building Code. Yeah, but the issue was whether they could be liable given there was a lack of safety controls.
But once again, you and I keep talking about directions from WorkSafe that appear online. You can use a code as a defence.
It's a guide.
Yeah, you can use.
It's not law.
Use a safety code as a defence, saying this is evidence of reasonable, but it's evidence of reasonably practicable. It's only evidence, but if there is a factual circumstance that challenges the evidential assumptions, even in safety codes of compliance, they will not be enough. So the answer is, when you have an area, a construction site, whatever it is, and you have specific things that come on that site, that create differential risks, the code itself may not be compliant. You've got to say what is reasonably practical. What is the hazard?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what's the risk that goes with that? And here's an example of, we've got ramps because we have people who have disabilities. What are the nature of the disabilities? And does this ramp protect someone from injury? And the answer is no, it doesn't.
Yeah, I think it would be had been arguable if, say, it wasn't an obvious control. Like, obviously, we'll have cases where WorkSafe has their codes, and if you're complying with that, that should be enough. But in this case, it's a ramp without any railing. Like, even a child would know that people can fall off there.
They're everywhere, Nina. After I read this case and I walked into the post office, there was a ramp that goes up that has no railings on it.
Was it high though, or just like a little bit?
Oh, no, it was enough.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, it was enough. It went up 4 steps.
Well, I guess all these people better make sure they change their ramps.
And that just shows you that when we became aware of disabilities and we changed our building code to reflect the need for access, we didn't switch our brain on to safety at the time which we did it. We did it for access. That was the reason we did it. We did it to make sure there was equity and availability to resources. And we didn't go, well, how can we do that safely? We just said, okay, we'll make it easy for a person to get there. So one part of our brain doing something good forgot the other side, and I guess what we're saying is, please don't forget safety.
Mm.
This is our main topic, Nina, and it's about Elisha and Vision Australia. I think, and I'll talk about why in a second, this is probably the biggest case for the last year, and it will massively affect the way we manage discipline and we manage performance management. And it comes along with the Victorian Building Authority case, which says something different. So 5 years ago, employment law governed employment law. It was the only thing at play. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So how you manage someone was covered by the general group of employment law. This throws it out the window. So Elisha is a case of a guy who had an underlying and known mental health issue with anxiety and depression. For work, he was at a hotel. This is back in 2015. It's found it all that time to get through to the High Court. He had an argument with a hotel person who reported to his boss.
Yeah, like he verbally abused them.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
And
well, as in that's that came out in the case. Yeah.
The HR manager comes down, speaks to the hotel manager, says sorry, goes back, stands down, Mr. Elisha, then sends him a show cause notice with an allegation that says
relating to the hotel incident only.
Just limited to the hotel incident. But the decision is then made to terminate him, even though he denied vehemently the facts and circumstances around it. And the termination letter described a series of other concerns which were never put to him, which were not substantiated as truthful, but coloured the decision as well, because they said there was a pattern of this aggression.
Yeah, but he'd never seen any of those allegations.
And they'd never found any of them.
Yeah.
That was impressionistic stuff. So it doesn't sound that exciting in a way, except overwhelmingly since Addison Gramophone, a very old House of Lords decision, you could not claim psychological damages for a breach of contract.
Yeah.
Now, was this a breach of contract?
Wait, sorry, I think you need to say after everything that happened with that case, he got major depressive order.
He did. So he went to the unfair dismissal. They paid him out under a deed, the maximum amount they could pay him, and they thought that washed it away. Mm-hmm. And then through a plaintiff's lawyer, he went and brought a common law claim, and the common law claim said that the contract had been breached. It said the contract was breached because his contract said that he must comply with policies and procedure of Vision Australia, and Vision Australia's obligation during that process were to appropriately investigate.
Yeah.
And they didn't, and unquestionably didn't do it. Mm. Vision Australia said, well, look, we've done a deed, go away.
Yeah.
And the court said, well, you did a deed or agreement of release on the basis of an unfair dismissal claim, which only pleaded really the unfair dismissal claim and the normal parts of it. Can I say to you, it's scary because I've done those agreements thinking they released a lot more. So I want you to know that is the first thing you change when you're there.
Update your deeds.
Update your deeds, and we'll talk about that more another time. And when they came before the court, the first court, they said, well, they were obliged, Vision Australia, to comply with the policy. There was a mutuality, and they didn't, so it breached contract, and therefore the injury I suffered, the psychological injury, deserves to be compensated. First instance, Court of Appeal said, no, we're stuck by Addis's case, you can't do it. Went to the High Court. And the High Court said, no, of course. If you do something that harms somebody by breaching contract, they're entitled to bring psychological damages. We're talking about $1.4 million.
Crazy. It's just overturned it all.
It has. But what does that mean? And I guess this is what it means. One, the people that Nina and I argue against are usually trained employment lawyers. There is clarity and precision about what we're doing. The difference between us is factual, and there is a customary series of behaviours that go towards settlement quickly, painlessly. We probably run one in every 15 cases, if that. This will now have a group of people who see this as a product, a common law product can sell, a no-win, no-fee product. So we're going to see this boom of cases coming through where at the unfair dismissal stage, it's also being run by non-employment lawyers.
So it doesn't end at that stage.
No, and then it rolls on to this larger claim 3 to 5 years later. Yes, you're insured for it. Not saying you're
but
not.
It's still going to be very expensive and take a lot of time.
And if it's commenced quickly, because in plaintiff land, the speed at which you settle a matter is how plaintiff practice is measured. It means it is going to hit premium, so you're going to max out premium during that period. There are very serious ramifications that occur to it. Another question that was agitated is, does your duty under negligence, because that was pleaded, does your duty of having safe systems include investigation and disciplinary process? And the High Court said, we're not going to get drawn. That's not the issue that's here. I just want to put that out there because it's on the agenda. They dismissed it and they weren't interested in it. But this is a black letter High Court. If it goes back to being a greener High Court, more policy-driven High Court, they'll grab that.
Yeah.
And I just want you to remember on the other side of this case, there is the the Victorian Building Authority case that says you prosecute a process of discipline, of redundancy when you know a person is injured. I'll charge you with reckless endangerment. So now we've got these two groups. We've got common law and we've got safety coming in, broadening the field on employment law.
Yeah.
But most of all, broadening the powers of unions and plaintiff lawyers to engage in much more destructive, much more lengthy and hugely expensive litigation around what is a simple termination, which had it have been done right, had the contract been right, didn't incorporate the policies and procedure, the policies and procedures said, you're not incorporated, there was no management responsibilities in there, and you followed good process when you did it, you would have won at the unfair dismissal stage and the common law stage and the safety stage. So there is a simple pathway through. That's why this case is so important. Why don't we go and have a look at the problem for today?
Yeah, but before we move on,
I
think make sure you tune in to Andrew and Tom's thing where it's a deeper dive into it. We only very briefly touch on the case, but if you want to learn more, definitely check that out.
Yeah, we'll send a link out to that in this. Nina, over to you.
All right, case
Not much
study.
time left, I might add.
I have no idea what the time is.
We're around about 6 minutes now.
Okay, all right. Gil had been unwell. She was the accreditation manager at an aged care provider. 2 facilities had received show cause letters inquiring why they should retain their accreditation. Gil reported to Terry, the head of operations. Terry was furious about the risk posed by failure in accreditation with the looming threat of defunding and closure. She called Gil and told her she needed to see her immediately. Gil was working from home and offered to meet via Teams, but Terry insisted she travel in. In the meantime, Terry had spoken to Tom, the head of facilities management, her direct report, who told her it wasn't their fault, it was Gil's. He claimed she hadn't prepared them properly and had been sick throughout the process. When Gil arrived at work, why is it Gil as a woman?
Could be Jill.
Oh, okay.
But anyway,
okay.
I was going to let that go for a while.
But it's
first.
a G!
No,
Terry
we've got a Jill who works for us. You know that, don't you?
Do we?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, South Australia.
Oh, okay.
By the way,
okay.
sorry, Jill.
Terry kept... Do you just use all these work people here? Terry kept her waiting in the anteroom for 45 minutes. Terry was aware that Jill had been very sick but was still working hard to help the business, even though she should have been off work. Terry's PA then brought her into a room where Terry and the facilities manager, Tom, were sitting behind a large wooden table. Terry asked Jill to sit down and explained how distressed she was about the regulator's show cause letters, especially since the situation was all preventable. Jill explained that her lupus diagnosis during the accreditation audit combined with her sickness made the process very difficult, but she had worked through it for the business. Terry cut her off, shouting that the problem rested with Jill, not the facilities manager. managers. It was her incompetence. Jill couldn't believe what was being said. She asked, "How can you blame me?" Terry responded that she investigated and found it was Jill's fault, even though the investigation was nothing more than Tom blaming her. Jill tried to explain that several of the failures were clearly not her fault, such as the CFO's refusal to replace broken lifting apparatus in the geriatric wards and each manager's failure, despite repeated entreaties, to train and learn their own procedures. But she was interrupted when Terry said, "Tom has investigated and found it's your fault. We have no choice but to terminate your employment immediately." Jill suffered a severe panic attack and collapsed. They called an ambulance and Jill spent several days in the hospital recovering and receiving inpatient support as the panic attacks kept returning. Gosh, that was long.
That's hard, and you didn't breathe. I thought it was
Yeah,
good.
because it's just so
Can
long.
I just ask the first question? Does Jill have a workers' compensation?
Oh, yeah,
So the
definitely.
answer is just tick. That's so obvious, and we don't
Yeah.
need to tell you why. But can I
Yeah.
just say, if you're struggling with it, it's called reasonable management action. Was there a safety breach by Terry in the business?
Mm-hmm.
Psychological hazards. It's got them all, hasn't it?
Yeah.
The failure of internal fairness.
Lack of support.
Lack of support. Lack of appropriate process.
And was also aware that she'd been sick and was forcing her to work.
Yeah. No, it's not good, is it? Does Jill have any remedy under the Fair Work Act? I think she's got them all.
Yeah, definitely general protections.
And definitely unfair dismissal. Do you see how we're going with this?
Yeah.
This is a problem. I know you probably got all those answers, but the next question is, so at the moment you've got an exposure of maybe 30,000 under unfair dismissal as maximum, probably as an absolute maximum in it. You've probably got a claim with special damages for general protections, maybe 150 to 200,000, but psychological injury claims at common law, because general protection hasn't kept up with common
And
law.
a discrim code.
Yeah, and you've got a discrim code. You're upwards of $1 million. Isn't
Yeah.
that amazing? And your premium during that time, when the claim is brought in the first 3 years, or in other jurisdictions within the 5 year, within 5 years, that hits premium. This is a massive premium hit. Okay, and look, the last thing that's not there is, were they negligent in the way that they treated it? Did they breach a duty of care? Can I just say, they did breach a duty of care. It's the traditional one, which is they failed to exercise reasonable care to prevent foreseeable injury.
Yeah, they exacerbated.
So that ties back to the damage, which is psychological, but I'm just saying that's the breach in negligence, okay? And the breach in negligence of psychological injury has always been present, okay?
Could there be like a breach just by, oh no, there would be nothing in the contract to keep you safe?
Well, there might be, and so there are often obligations to set out, particularly in senior executive ones, which have a series of obligations around safety. Could be. But I think a fascinating case study, and I think it's lovely.
Because you wrote it?
I did write it, actually. You knew that, didn't you? And lovely to have you back.
Yeah, it's
and
nice to be back.
Have our sort of, do you have your head to the grindstone? What is I've never been allowed to use those things. What do you put your head to the
What
grindstone?
are you talking about?
That's just...
I think that means that's the end of the first one.
No,
for
that
this
means
year.
how hard we've been working. Sorry, but it is the end of the first one, and
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Give us a thumbs up
Give
to
us a
show
thumbs
that
up,
it's worth
and
it.
we will send you Tom and my link as well.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.